Hi everyone, and welcome to my podcast for the final exam of Western cultural civilization. I'm Reva, and today I'll be talking about one of the most powerful and fascinating forces in early global trade history, the Dutch East India Company, or as it known in Dutch, VOC. You might have heard of it as the world's first multinational corporation, but its legacy goes far beyond that. So, the VOC didn't just trade spices, it shaped geopolitics, colonized entire regions, and left lasting impacts, especially in Indonesia, where I am from. So, let's explore its rise, influence, and eventual downfall. So the VOC was founded in 1602 during the Dutch Golden Age. But to understand why it was created, we need to look back a little in the 15th. The spice trade was controlled by the Portuguese, who had exclusive routes to places like the Spice Islands in what is now Indonesia. Spices like nutmeg, cloves, and pepper were extremely valuable, even more than gold at one point. And at the time, the Netherlands was under Spanish rule and struggling for independence, and trade was being restricted, and Dutch merchants felt economically choked. So, in response, they decided to find their own route to the East Indies. And after some secret work to obtain Portuguese navigation charts, the Dutch finally sent their own fleet to Asia in 1595. The expedition faced conflicts and disease but returned with enough spices to show there was profit to be made. And 2 years later, another fleet reached the Maluku Island and returned with a 400% profit, and that's when the Dutch realized this cannot just be one-time thing, it has to be a system. So the VOC was born, but this wasn't just a trading company. The Dutch government gave it huge powers, and it could sign treaties, build forts, wage war, and even execute people. It was basically a government in corporate form, and they established permanent trading posts across Asia, starting in Banten, then in Batavia, which is now Jakarta, that became the VOC's ASEAN headquarters. And what made the VOC unique was how they pulled investor money across multiple voyages. And this reduced risk and allowed them to send out bigger and stronger fleets. And this idea, spreading financial risk, is still the foundation of how corporation and the stock market work today. By the mid-60s, the VOC was a giant of 150 merchant ships, 14 warships, and a private army. Then they also have over 50,000 employees, and they were paying shareholders up to 40% in dividends. Imagine that, a shipping company in the 60s acting like a global superpower. Now, let's talk about the VOC's impact, especially on Indonesia. While it started with trade, the VOC's influence soon turned into domination. They pushed out the Portuguese, clashed with the English East India Company, and secured a monopoly over Indonesian spices. But this wasn't peaceful. There were wars, betrayals, and massacres. And one dark event was the Batavia massacres in 1740, when VOC troops killed over 10,000 Chinese residents in the city due to rumor of rebellion, and this not only ruined their reputation but showed how deeply colonial violence was embedded in their operations. And And even though they claim to bring order and trade, the VOC left behind a system of exploitation, one that will continue into full Dutch colonization of Indonesia later. Despite their power, the VOC began to decline in the 18th century. Why? Well, part of it was due to changing tastes. Europeans wanted coffee, tea, and textiles more than spices. Also, Japan, one of their biggest silver suppliers, started limiting exports. Plus, competitions grew from the British and French, and the Fourth Anglo-Dutch War was a turning point, and the VOC lost ships, colonized, and access to markets. By 1796, the VOC was bankrupt and taken over by the Dutch government. What was once the richest company in the world collapsed under corruption, war, and greed. So, what can we learn from the VOC today? It was a pioneer of capitalism and colonialism. It showed the power of global trade, but also the danger of profit-driven exploitation. As someone from Indonesia, this history feels very real, and the VOC wasn't just a company, it was part of how our islands were colonized for over 300 years. And understanding the VOC helps us understand not only Western civilization, but how economics, politics, and power are still deeply connected. Well, thanks for listening to my podcast. I hope this gave you a deeper insight into how a 17th century trading company shaped our world in ways we still feel today. I am Reva, and this was my final exam podcast for Western cultural civilization. See you next time.